Earth Day was just recently commemorated, as it is every year, but it's become more and more clear that in order for the world to survive and thrive, we need to start thinking about Earth Day as being every day. A recent UN report found instances of floods, storms, heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, and wildfires have all significantly increased in the past 20 years. Scientists blame rising global temperatures. And the UN says unless world leaders take action now, the world will become, quote, an unimaginable hell for millions. We talked to a climate scientist about that and what we can do on a personal level to make sure we're making a positive impact and not a negative one. Well, it could be as simple as the products you buy at the store and what you throw away. We look at how to be less of a burden to the planet as we talk to a sustainability expert about all that garbage. Fox 11 News In Depth starts right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Marla Tejas, in for our host, Hal Eisner, who is still out on medical leave. Well, it seems like it was just yesterday that California was in the grip of a brutal drought, and all we can say is here we go again as we head into another dry year. But it's not just California that will be affected. In coming months, projections show that man-made lakes that store water for millions in the West and Mexico could drop to historic lows. Well, that could trigger the federal government's first ever official water shortage declaration. And of course, here in the West, we know that dry spells also bring those devastating wildfires across the region. Here to talk to us about the impact of drought and fires in the West is Dr. Abatzoglou from the University of California, Merced. He is an associate professor in management of complex systems, focusing on climate science. So welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thanks, Marla, for having me.
Well, we are being warned that this could be a serious drought year. In fact, Governor Gavin Newsom recently announced a drought emergency declaration for Mendocino and Sonoma counties. Of course, those are up in the Bay Area. So I want to get your reaction to that. I trust it's a good thing when public officials take notice and take action.
Yeah, no, this is most definitely a drought year, and we're on the sort of tail end of back-to-back drought years, and that certainly compounds the sort of impacts. We're at about half what we ought to have in terms of our precipitation. Mountain snowpack is abysmal. Stream flows are really dry. It's a drought, and we're locked into it, and it's good that we're evaluating some mechanisms to basically provide assistance for those impacted.
When you say back-to-back years for drought, then I think of the phrase long-term drought. You're nodding. What can we expect? How long will this last?
Yeah, well, by some accounts, we've been in a state of drought across the Southwest, including California, for the past 20 years. We've had a few wet years, really wet years punctuated in there, but it's been dry for about 20 years. And it turns out that not only is this sort of the driest 20-year period that we've seen over the past century, but if we go back using tree rings, we find out that this so-called mega drought is effectively the second worst we've seen in over a millennia.
Well, when the governor spoke earlier this week, he did so from Lake Mendocino. Of course, that's one of the counties that declared for this emergency declaration for drought. I grew up going there, and he literally looked like he was on the surface of the moon. It literally takes my breath away. It's so impactful to see that. And how do we overcome this?
Yeah, well, we certainly will see years that are going to be wet. Right, so 2019, 2017 were really wet years. But the reality is that with the warming climate, with man-made climate change, there are simply more straws that are sucking water out of our soils, out of our vegetation, and that's providing a tax, right? So it's precipitation is one part of drought. The other part is evapotranspiration, and a warming and drying climate increase the thirst of the atmosphere. And that tax is being noted, right? And that's why we're seeing the droughts here in California, the drought across much of the southwestern United States. Like we're looking at like Lake Mead here and it reaching these historically low levels. There are challenges afoot, and water is one thing that, is the lifeblood for much of the West. We've done a number in terms of trying to reduce our own water use. In terms of California has actually sort of flatlined its water use over the past 30 to 40 years. And now what we're seeing is that just isn't enough, right? We're seeing now the influence of a warming and drying climate, and it's really exposing some of the, inefficiencies in our system.
Well, let's talk about wildfires. What's your perspective on wildfires? Because when we see dry land in the brush, and 2020 was just a historic year for wildfires, and not in a positive way, historically speaking. So what's your outlook on that?
Yeah, so wildfires are a little bit more complicated. They also involve climate as well as other human factors, including land management, human ignitions. But one thing that is clear is that a warming and drying climate increases the one key ingredient for a wildfire, that is dry vegetation. And so we've seen our fire seasons get warmer, the fire seasons get longer, and so long as there is fuel out there in terms of our forest and there's ignitions out there, we are going to see fire seasons, not necessarily a repeat of 2020 every year, but we've certainly loaded the dice for years like what we've seen recently.
Is there anything that just the average person can do?
Yeah, so I think there are things that we can do both from the drought side and from the fire side, right, on an individual level. We can certainly try to avoid ignitions, right, from a fire side. From a water side, there are, decisions that we can make in terms of how we, landscape, et cetera. Those small choices can add up to some degree, right? And at least in terms of our fires in the forested systems, there's efforts underway to try to treat more forested land to basically remove those ingredients from the mix. We know that it's obviously hot and dry in the deserts of Southern California. We don't necessarily see the fires there because there isn't vegetation. That isn't necessarily the outcome we want, right? We would like to enjoy our forests. So we are going to have to really sort of escalate the way in which we're sort of adapting to this changing climate.
I'm not sure if you can answer this quickly, but in terms of rising global temperatures, how much is that our fault, man-made?
Yeah, most of it's our fault. Globally, the increase that we've seen, we've attributed basically all of it to human-caused climate change. The numbers differ a little bit if we look at individual states or locations.
Okay. And that just comes down to we have to be more mindful of the planet, right?
Yeah, we aren't going to stop. This is a freight train, right? And we aren't going to stop it down instantly. It's going to take a lot of collective action.
It's quite the analogy. All right, Doctor, we're not done with you yet, so sit tight. Coming up next on Fox 11 News in Depth, we look at the increasing impact of climate change on the planet and when we will reach the point of no return. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The subject of climate change is inescapable. Hundreds of scientists and decades worth of research have showed us the trend faced by the entire planet. A grim graphic on NASA's website shows the evidence. Look at this. Climate fluctuations tracked over 800,000 years, showing a massive spike starting within the last 100 years, now reaching uncharted levels. We're back now with Dr. Abatzoglou. When you look at those latest findings, Doctor, what is your reaction?
It's not surprising to me. That is a trajectory that we've been on. Unless there's substantial changes, we're going to continue up that, that rising scale there. We have 50% more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than we did in 1850. So we are certainly well above where we ought to be.
Now, I know that the Biden administration wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, so within the next 10 years. Your reaction?
That is an ambitious goal. That's my reaction. California has actually done a pretty good job at showing that can be done. Right? California's already reduced their emissions to some degree. The question is whether or not that policy, those set of protocols can be implemented in other states that might be a little bit more reticent to, act on climate change.
Let's talk a little bit about climate change and the fact that not everybody agrees that it's a real thing. Among climate scientists, though, there is agreement that it is very much a real thing. What do you say to people who say there's no such thing?
Good question. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. Scientists have been looking at climate change from all different angles. If we can identify that this was not a human-caused signal, we would be all over that. That'd be great. The reality is that, we've been looking at human-caused climate change for a century plus, and the science hasn't changed dramatically. Our answers in terms of what the future might look like aren't changing dramatically, and that future doesn't look any better. So we're pretty clear on the big picture. It's kind of like a puzzle, right? Science is a little bit like a puzzle where we have most of the pieces filled in. Puzzle isn't completely solved right now, but we're pretty clear that we know what that puzzle actually shows us.
When you're out and about in your everyday life, and you talk about what you do for a living, do you come across those people who have the courage to tell you that they don't think that it's real?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I do. Oftentimes we'll change the topic, right? It's one of those topics that, some people just won't engage on to some degree. I think it's a complicated topic because we know that weather varies dramatically from day to day. We also know that in California, right, you rarely get an average year of precipitation. So weather and climate are inherently variable, and it's hard for us, I think, to understand what change even looks like.
Well, the planet is warming, so why do some places find themselves cold and snowier?
Yeah, and so I don't know necessarily, the statistics don't say that we're seeing more cold, but when we do see cold, perhaps the problem is that we're just not used to it, right? The occurrence of cold events is actually decaying through time, and when we do see a big cold event like we saw this year in Texas, it sort of takes us by surprise. And that's telling us that we're actually possibly adapting to conditions as time goes on. So that may be good. But we will see with climate change that there still will be cold days. There still will be abundant snowfall. In some cases, we actually may see more snowfall in places because we have a wetter atmosphere.
What about the difference between weather and climate? Two different things, right?
Most definitely. I think this is where you do see some confusion or conflation of climate change and weather. Right? Weather is the state of the atmosphere at any given time. If you want to know the weather, go outside, take an observation, right? And climate is really the statistics of weather over a long time period. And so I like to think about analogies, right? Weather is what you had for breakfast this morning. Climate is your diet. Weather is the outfit you're wearing. Climate are the clothes in your closet. These things can change through time, right? So, but subtle changes in climate, for example, in California, we've seen a warming of about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And that, when we're talking about a daily weather forecast, if yesterday was 3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than today, probably we wouldn't lose any sleep over it. But in a climate context, that is fairly substantial, right? That can mean the difference between.
Let me just clarify, that's
rain and snow.
3 degrees Fahrenheit over how long have we seen this?
3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900.
Since 1900, right. And so a lot of people would say, well, 3 degrees, that's nothing.
That's right. That's right. And so that context, I think, is something that we probably need to figure out how to convey to a general audience, right? And I think from a snowpack perspective in California and much of the West, we're very, very dependent on snow. 3 degrees Fahrenheit worth of warming, that shifts your snow line up, right? 500, 600 feet. And that's that much less water that's going to be stored in mountain snowpack and become used by, water resources in spring and summer.
All right. Is the prognosis as grim as it sounds? Is it too late to turn this around?
It's not too late to turn it around. We have a freight train, right? We're not going to turn it around tomorrow. But if the goal is to avoid the sort of transformative change by, maybe our children or our grandchildren's generation, we can still act and we can still sort of, bend that curve, if you will. There are some scenarios where if we do not effectively have collective action on climate change, we're going to see a climate that looks very, very different than it does today. However, if we do act, we may see certainly some more change in terms of climate, but it may be something that we can tolerate and adapt to.
Dr. John Abatzoglou from the University of California, Merced, thank you very much. And we appreciated your analogies today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, coming up on Fox 11 News In Depth, can't tell your trash from your recyclables, not sure what all those markings mean on your plastics. We'll help you sort out your sorting right after this. So, are you motivated to do your part, but you do not know where to start? Every little bit helps, but you have to know what to do with your garbage, for instance. So joining us to Trash Talk is Lauren Olson. She's a zero waste manager and sustainability expert for World Centric. We welcome Lauren to Fox 11 News In Depth. Thank you so much for being with us. I hear that you say that a lot of people don't actually recycle. Instead, they wish cycle. What does that mean?
Well, wish cycling is the unfortunate action when you're just not sure if an item is recyclable or compostable. So you put it in the bin, hoping that it will work out. You're wishfully thinking that maybe someone will sort it out or maybe they'll figure it out. I've heard people say that as right at the bin, oh, they'll figure it out. But the thing is, when you do that, you can contaminate the entire load of recycling or composting by putting that item in there that shouldn't be in there.
Okay, so to those wish cyclers out there, that's a no-no, a really big no-no.
Yeah, so when in doubt, look it up. And if you don't have the time to look it up, throw it out, unfortunately, because it's really best to keep those streams separated.
Okay, there are so many confusing rules about recycling. Can you help us sort that out?
Sure. Well, in LA, we're very lucky in that we can recycle a lot of variety of different things. So pretty much all plastics are recyclable, and including all cartons, which is not available in most places in the United States, like your milk cartons, your Tetra Pak containers, all of that are actually recyclable. So there's a wide variety of things that you can put in your bin, and even styrofoam is recyclable in LA. But the biggest thing that you need to be concerned about is food waste. So just make sure that there's no food waste attached to any of your materials, because that is not good for the resale market of these materials, and it's also really stinky for everyone involved, including the workers that have to sort it.
Okay, so for instance, you just showed the styrofoam. Make sure that all the food's out of it. Wash it out, I would suggest.
Yeah, wash it out if possible, and make sure it's clean. But that's why compostable containers are really great, and that's what we make here at World Centric, our compostable clamshells as opposed to styrofoam. And they don't use any sort of petroleum products, and you can leave the food waste in them and put them right into your composting bin. So that's a great option because you don't have to clean it out, use extra water, and you're avoiding the use of petroleum oil.
On those plastic bottles, many of them have little numbers on them. What does that mean, and can you recycle those?
Yeah, so on the bottom of all your containers, there'll be little tiny numbers. So for this yogurt container, it says number 5, which means that's polypropylene. And basically those indicate what type of plastic that it is. So your number 1 will be your most common PET plastic, like water bottles. Number 2 will be your second most common, like your milk jug type container. And in LA, you're able to recycle plastics 1 through 7, so all of the plastics. So it's really for your information. But I would say, if possible, avoid creating number 7 plastic, just because it's difficult to find a market for that and
what's
more
number
difficult
7?
to sort.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what's number 7 plastic?
Means like other, so it's like anything kind of fits into that category. So it's like stuff that isn't in plastics 1 through 6. So it's just kind of like a hodgepodge category.
Okay.
And so sticking to plastics 1 and 2 and 5 is probably for the best in terms of making sure your stuff actually gets recycled and has an end market for it.
Now I'm going to be looking at all the numbers on any plastic goods that I consume. 1, 2, and 5. Those are the lucky numbers. Okay, what about the caps on plastic bottles? Are those recyclable?
Yeah, so it is recommended to just leave the caps right on the item whenever possible. You do want to clean it out, but you can leave the cap right on the item. However, if it's going to fall off and all that, I do recommend just throwing it out because those type of small items might just get sifted out anyway. So you're just helping the recycling facility almost skip that step because they are made of a different plastic than the original material.
Oh, okay. All right, good to know. So you can keep the cap on and those qualify for recycling. Plastic, those metallic plastic shiny bags for potato chips?
Oh yeah, that's a big no-no. So those type of composite materials, that's a metallized plastic. You're gonna wanna keep those out of recycling. Those are not recyclable. So that basically is a plastic with a metal on the inside. Another composite material that I'll see sometimes is like, a coffee thermos, like this has clearly got some plastic and some metal components. So anything like this, where it's clearly a couple different materials all melded together, you want to keep those out of the system, even though that looks mostly like metal. So same with your chip bag, it looks like plastic, but it's also metal. So that's where you want to just throw that out.
Okay, we have less than 30 seconds. Composting, how important is that?
Composting is a great solution for the climate because it keeps food waste out of the landfill. So we're all trying to do as much as we can for climate change right now. When food goes into the landfill, it creates methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So if you don't have access to curbside composting, it's a great activity that you can try to do at home, either at a compost pile or a tumbler. And again, world-centric, we make fully compostable products for takeout, and you can put those right into your curbside composting.
Love talking trash with you, Lauren, from World-Centric. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we'll be back with more Fox 11 News in depth right after this break. That's it for this week's Fox 11 News in depth. But before we go, we want to update you on our host Hal Eisner's recovery. You may recall Hal and his photographer were hit by an alleged drunk driver and wound up in the hospital. We're all delighted that Hal is now out of the hospital. He is continuing his rehabilitation at home. He's now walking with crutches and is okay for some light driving. No doubt he will be back with us soon. That is an order, Hal. We miss you. We love you. Same to you, Joab. All right, everybody, have a great week, and thanks for spending some time with us.